Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight's story is titled, The Wind That Whispers Names. Let the shadows speak.
Part 1. The Edge of the Storm. I don't remember when the wind started calling out to me. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it just scratched faintly against the siding or crept through the cracks in the old window frames like a sigh. But lately it had grown bolder, clear, almost like it knew me, almost like it remembered. The last time it spoke my name, I was standing in the middle of the wheat field, watching the sky turn to soot. That morning, I had woken up to the smell of dry earth and static. My boots crunched over cracked floorboards as I crossed the cabin. The air was brittle, the kind of dryness that settles behind your teeth and makes your gums itch. Outside, the world was the color of rust. The storm sat on the horizon like a crouched beast, black, wide, and motionless. It didn't move, not yet. Just waited, watching. I hadn't seen another soul in 3 days. It used to be different out here. My neighbors, Tommy and Ruth down the ridge, old Mrs. Carnes across the gulch. They'd stop by after Sunday service or send over pies during harvest. But now, even the birds didn't come around anymore. The trees hadn't rustled in weeks. Not even a stray coyote. And I knew why. Something was wrong with the wind. I spent that morning doing the usual chores or pretending to. Tied down the barn doors with extra rope. Topped off the trough, though the livestock had been too spooked to drink. Fed the hens even though half of them hadn't laid eggs in days. They just huddled in the corners, heads twitching toward the dark sky like they could feel something coming. Like they understood what I wouldn't say aloud. There was a hum in the air. Low, constant, buried under the silence. At around noon, I saw movement in the distance. A figure on horseback cutting through the yellow haze. As he came closer, I recognized the old duster coat and wide brim hat. Ellis Ward. Lived out by the southern ridge. He hadn't aged a day in years, wiry and sharp as ever, with a jaw like a clenched vice. But today he looked like he'd been dragged through hell. The dust caked in his beard. His horse's flanks trembled with exhaustion. He didn't dismount, just sat there staring at me, the wind tugging at the brim of his hat. "They're gone," he said flatly. I didn't ask who. He finally slid off the horse, boots sinking into the loose earth like it was ash. His voice was tight, dry. "I stopped by the Morgan place this morning. Found them, folded up like they were part of the walls. Every one of them. Sarah, the boys, and Ben. God, Ben had no face left." The wind hissed between us. I thought I heard something in it. A soft, dragging whisper. "What about their animals?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. Pen was full of bones, stripped clean. Even the dog. Only thing left was the old bell Ben used to ring when he came in from the fields. Still swinging. I swallowed hard. Tried not to look at the black wall of dust behind him. "They didn't do that to themselves," I said. Ellis didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at me, he said, "It knows our names." He stayed the night, though neither of us slept. We drank the last of my whiskey and sat by the shuttered window, staring into the dark. Every few hours we'd hear it, something scratching along the roof. Once we swore we saw a shadow move across the porch, but when Ellis threw open the door with his rifle drawn, there was nothing there. Just the sound of wind and a single wheat stalk trembling in the corner of the step. I asked him once what he meant earlier about the wind knowing our names. He stared into the fireplace long after the flames had died. "It started with whispers," he said. "Right after my wife passed. I thought I was going mad. But the wind, it called her name first. Then mine. Then others." "Like what?" He didn't speak for a while. Then he turned and looked me dead in the eye. Like it was calling us back to something. Like we'd already been claimed. The next morning the wind was stronger. It shook the shutters hard enough to rattle the nails loose. The wheat lay flat, pressed by invisible hands. Ellis was gone. No note, no tracks, no sound of hoofbeats, just the sound of wind and the faint echo of a voice I swear I recognized, mine, calling from the field. Part 2. Where the Dust Settles. I searched for Ellis until the sky bled rust. His horse was still tied to the porch post, the saddle still warm. No sign of struggle, just gone. I called his name louder each time until my throat turned raw. The wind carried it away like it had been waiting. No echo came back, only that scraping sound in the fields, like something was dragging its fingers through the wheat. By mid-afternoon, the air was too thick to breathe outside. Dust danced in slow spirals, rising from the ground without any wind to lift them. I nailed the shutters tighter, plugged the door frame with torn bed sheets, but it didn't stop the sound, like whispers under the floorboards, like something remembering me. That night, I dreamed of my brother again. I hadn't seen Caleb in 6 years. We stopped speaking the day after our mother's funeral. He blamed me for not making it home in time to say goodbye. I blamed him for never leaving this cursed stretch of land. But in the dream, he stood by the well outside, skin pale like salt, eyes hollow. He held something in his hands, a bundle wrapped in canvas, stained red at the corners. I couldn't move. He spoke, but no sound came out. Only the wind behind him, calling names I recognized. Mine, Ellis, Ruth, the Morgans, Caleb's, all in a slow, dragging chant. I woke choking, my sheets soaked through with sweat and dust. At dawn, I headed toward the old church by the ridge. It wasn't for salvation. Not really. I just needed to see another place that still stood. The chapel was half collapsed, the steeple leaning like a drunkard mid-fall. The wind had carved symbols into the sideboards, deep spirals, names etched in foreign scrawl, some scratched with fingernails. The front doors hung open. Inside, the pews were overturned. The pulpit had split in half, and carved into the floor in dried blood or something worse were 4 names. Mine, Ellis Ward, Caleb Marin, and another I didn't know, Isaiah Dent. I stared at that last one for a long time. I found the church records buried under a pile of hymnals and rat shit in the back office. Most pages were too brittle to touch, but I found one name on a yellowed birth registry that matched. Isaiah Dent, born 1873, died, no date. My stomach twisted. I flipped through more pages, finding fragments of his name over decades. Isaiah leading services during the 1910 plague. A sermon given during the 1921 drought. A wedding in 1933. But the handwriting never changed. He should have been dead 30 years by then. Then I found the newspaper clipping folded between 2 crumbling bulletins. Pastor missing after tragic fire, 1942. Isaiah Dent, the long-standing pastor of St. Gabriel's, was presumed dead after a fire razed the old rectory Tuesday evening. Authorities reported no remains were found. Several witnesses claimed to hear chanting from inside the building shortly before the blaze began, but no official cause has been determined. My fingers trembled as I ran them over the blurred headline. On the back of the article, in barely legible pencil, someone had scrawled, "He was never buried. The wind kept him." When I stepped back outside, the wind had changed direction. It no longer howled. It moaned, low and steady, like a voice barely restrained by breath. A voice waiting for me to answer. As I walked back toward my land, the wheat seemed to bow in my path, not from the wind, but as if something beneath it crawled, keeping pace. Watching. At the edge of my field, I stopped dead. Someone was standing near the barn. It wasn't Alice. It was Ruth Carnes. Her dress was torn, her skin pale, lined with soot. Her mouth hung open and something whispered from it, not words, just wind. Her eyes were dark and wide, like two storm clouds caught in a face. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. I took a step forward. Her head jerked sideways with a wet, cracking sound. The whispering from her mouth stopped. Then she screamed. It wasn't her voice. It was hundreds, layers of voices rising like smoke. Names and prayers and gasps and laughter and one long stretched out moan of anguish. Then she turned, slowly like a puppet, and walked into the barn without a glance back. I waited. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. She didn't come out. I should have left then. Should have saddled a horse, headed east, and never looked back. But the wind kept calling names, and mine was always louder than the rest. Inside the barn, it was darker than it should have been. Even with the sun above, no light reached through the cracks. The hay was matted, soaked. The animals were gone, no blood, no mess, just missing. And in the center of the floor was a circle, burned into the wood, black and perfect. On its edge sat Ruth, still, silent, staring at me. I took one step closer and she lifted a finger, pointed at the well outside, then vanished. No sound, no light, just gone. The only thing left was the whisper, louder now, not just names, but words. It lives where you buried it. Part 3. What lies beneath? The well had been there longer than the house, longer than the fences, longer than the town. My grandfather built the cabin beside it, said the water never ran dry even during the Dust Bowl. When the neighbors' creeks turned to gravel, our well still sang. I hadn't looked down that shaft in years. I stood at the edge of the circle in the barn, still warm though no fire burned. The air smelled of ash and rot. Ruth was gone, if she'd ever been real to begin with, but the message was clear. It lives where you buried it. Not what I noticed, where. I lit the lantern and stepped outside. The sky was thick with smoke-colored clouds, though no fire burned on the land. The light from the barn barely reached past the door frame. I walked slowly toward the well. It sat crooked now, the stones around its mouth shifted by years of wind and neglect. One of the support beams had cracked and was splintering outward like a rotted rib. The rope and bucket were missing. I held the lantern out and looked down. Only darkness. No sound. No echo. Then something moved. Not quickly, not a jolt. Just a gentle, deliberate shift, like something large turning slowly in its sleep. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the light in the lantern flickered. I pulled back, heart slamming. My boots scraped the dust. The wind picked up again, and this time it didn't say my name. It said Caleb's. I ran back to the house, not because I was afraid, I was far past that point, but because I had to be sure. I had to know if I'd buried Caleb deep enough. In the back closet, behind the dusty coats and my father's old rifle, sat a locked chest. I knelt down, pried it open. Inside were the things I never let go of. A letter I never sent. A photograph of me and Caleb fishing in the Bighorn River. And the small, cloth-wrapped bundle I had dug from the ash behind the shed last summer. A human jawbone, cracked clean in half. I never meant to leave him. That night 6 years ago, after the funeral, we argued. He'd been drinking, and I'd been tired of playing caretaker to a dying legacy. I told him the land was cursed, and he said I was too much of a coward to stay and fix it. We fought by the well. The last thing I remember is him shoving me. The next morning, there was blood on the stone lip, and Caleb was gone. I told myself he'd left, like Ellis, like Ruth, like everyone else. But I never forgot the sound the wind made that night, like it was chewing something. Now it whispered his name over and over, calling him back, calling me back, That evening, I poured a line of salt around the well. It was an old trick, something I'd read once or heard from my grandmother. She used to say, "Salt keeps the dead from rising, and the old things from remembering." I stayed up with my shotgun facing the barn. The fields trembled in the wind, and every so often, I saw shapes move through the crops. Not people, not animals, something else. Tall, thin, wrong. They never came close, but I swear I could hear them breathing. At midnight, the wind stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence was like being buried alive. My ears rang from the absence of it. Then I heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Not on the door. From under the floorboards. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I walked the house with the lantern, its flames struggling in the thick air. Dust hung motionless like suspended breath. The clock hadn't ticked in hours. By dawn, I made a decision. I had to know what was beneath the well. I spent all morning fashioning a rope from old sheets and fence ties. Tied it to a beam. Tested it twice. I wasn't going in far, just enough to see. The mouth of the well felt colder than the air around it. Not just cool, wrong. Like the cold you feel in a room that's been sealed too long, where something used to live. I lowered the lantern first. The light descended 10 feet, 20, then hit something. What? A ledge? No, a door. I went down. The rope burned my hands, and the walls of the well felt like they were leaning inward, closer the deeper I went. Dust clung to every surface. My lungs burned. When I reached the bottom, I stood on something soft. I lifted the lantern. Beneath my boots was a layer of hair. Human hair. Tangled, thick, matted. As if 1,000 scalps had been shed down here over time. The door was half rotted, set into the wall of the shaft. No handle. Just a circular carving in the wood. A spiral of names. At the center, Isaiah Dent. The second I touched the door, the wind came back. It roared up the shaft, spinning around me like it had been held back for years. I tasted blood in the air. The lantern blew out. Something breathed on my neck. Then I heard the voice again. Not from outside. From inside the well walls. He gave us names. You gave us bones. I climbed back out, scraping my knees raw. When I pulled myself over the edge, the sky above was red. Not sunset red. Blood red. The sun was gone. The wind had no direction. And every single name it spoke now was mine. Part 4. The names beneath. By the time I reached the house again, I couldn't hear the birds. Not because there weren't any, they'd vanished weeks ago, but because the world had gone quiet in the wrong way. Even the wind, which had howled for days, seemed to pause, like it was holding its breath, or mine. The air felt heavier now, like I was breathing through wet burlap. I slammed the door shut, barred it with the table, and collapsed to the floor. My hands were scraped raw, and the taste of the well was still in my throat, earth and iron and something sweeter, like rotting fruit, or blood left out in the sun. I tried to sleep. My body needed it. But every time I shut my eyes, I saw that door again. The spiral carved into it. The name, Isaiah Dent. And underneath the spiral, I remembered now, a second set of markings. Smaller. Etched in a script I didn't recognize. I didn't believe in curses growing up. Not really. My mother was devout, my father practical, and I always floated somewhere in between. Faith without shape, skepticism without anchor. But what I saw in that well, that wasn't folklore. That was memory, ancient and patient, and it remembered me. I opened my grandfather's Bible. It had sat on the mantel for years untouched. Thick leather, warped by heat, its edges eaten by mice. He used to say the scriptures could explain any horror if you read them right. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found it. Near the back, a note tucked between the pages of Revelation, written in my grandfather's cramped, uneven hand. Den is not a name. It's a lock, a mouth shut with fire. Do not speak it after dark. Beneath the note, a symbol was drawn in faded red pencil. The spiral, just like the door. I flipped back through the Bible. Dozens of pages had been underlined. Not verses, names. Ezekiel, Menahem, Baruch, Isaiah. Every single one underlined in red. All names of men who heard voices in the wind, saw visions, claimed to speak for God, or something that sounded like him. That night, I dreamed of the chapel again. Not as it was, but as it had been, whole, clean, filled with smoke and song. The pews were full. Faces I didn't recognize, dressed in clothes too old for my lifetime. At the altar stood Isaiah Dent, but it wasn't a man. It wore a man's skin, spoke with a man's tongue, but its voice had weight, like thunder before the storm. It looked at me and smiled. I woke screaming. The table I'd used to barricade the door had been moved. The door was cracked open. Outside, the wheat bent backwards against the wind, though there was no breeze. It bowed toward the well, like it was listening. I found Ellis's journal in the barn, tucked beneath a floorboard wrapped in oilcloth. I didn't know he kept one. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before he vanished. Saw Dent again today, by the tree line. Eyes like dried ink. I know he's dead. Has to be. But the land don't forget like people do. Neither does the wind. It's not a haunting. Not exactly. It's more like the ground remembers the blood that fed it. He was never buried. That was the mistake. That line hit me hard. He was never buried. The next day I returned to the chapel. I don't remember deciding. My body just moved. The wind followed me like a shadow, brushing against my ears with every step, whispering names I didn't know. Some sounded old, biblical. Others sounded like mine, but none were alive anymore. Inside the ruined chapel, the dust had settled oddly. It formed words, names, carved into the ash on the floor. The spiral returned, wider this time, with hundreds of names along its curve. The center of the spiral was empty, waiting. I found the trapdoor behind the altar, half buried under broken stone and shattered hymnals. I pried it open with a rusted crowbar. The stairs beneath led down, way down. The air turned colder with each step. I could hear the wind above me, muffled like it was behind thick glass. And underneath that, I heard something worse. Breathing, slow, wet, rhythmic, like lungs full of soil. The hallway at the bottom opened into a chamber. Carved into the walls were more spirals. Names again, scratched into the stone by fingernails, burned by candle soot, written in blood. In the center stood a crude stone table. On it a book, bound in black leather. No title, no markings. When I opened it, the pages were full of names, thousands, and near the back, written in a different hand, underlined twice, Caleb Marin, Daniel Marin, my name. The wind howled through the stairwell. Dust spun in place above the altar. The voice returned, not from the book, not from the wind, from inside me. You were meant to take his place. Part 5, A Place for the Living. I slammed the book shut and stumbled back from the stone table. The air thickened around me, pressing against my chest like I'd stepped underwater. The names echoed inside my skull, each one growing louder as if someone were chanting them backward through a cracked radio. Caleb Marin, Daniel Marin. My name was still there, still waiting. The chamber shifted around me. It was subtle at first, just the sense that the walls were breathing. Then came the smell. Not rot, not death, something far older. like mildew in a sealed crypt, like wet dust and burnt parchment. And under that, pine, fresh pine, coffin wood. I turned to run. The stairwell was gone. Where the trapdoor had been was only stone, seamless, cold. My lantern guttered, then flared blue. The names on the wall shimmered, thousands of them, dancing under the light like insects crawling beneath translucent skin. Then I heard him. Daniel. The voice didn't come from in front of me, or behind. It came from everywhere. The walls, the stone, the dust in my lungs. I turned slowly, and he was there. Isaiah dead. But not as he looked in the photograph. This version was bloated with time. His skin was the color of wax paper, stretched too tight over sharp bones. His eyes had no whites, just two pits of swirling dust. His robes were shredded, dragging like tendrils across the floor. His mouth hung open just slightly, like it had never truly closed. He smiled with his whole face and stepped forward. "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice was soft, kind, like a teacher greeting a lost student. "You've seen the signs, heard the wind, felt the name crawling in your blood." I raised the lantern between us. "What the hell are you?" He stopped 3 feet from me, not threatening, not quite human. "Names," he said. "That's all we are. That's all we ever were." He gestured to the book on the altar. "It's not a ledger. It's not a curse. It's a promise. Every name written down is remembered. The ones who forget, the ones the world forgets, they rot." I took a step back, my heel brushing the edge of a stone basin I hadn't seen before. Inside was water, still dark. No, not water. Thick and red-black, the color of dried blood mixed with soot. He nodded toward it. "Dip your hand. Add your name. Be remembered forever." I looked down into the basin. The surface rippled. Reflected in it wasn't my face. It was Caleb's. His eyes were wide, mouth open in a silent scream, skin bloated and gray. Behind him, tendrils of shadow wrapped around his throat like a noose. I stumbled back again. "You used him," I said, voice shaking. Isaiah's expression didn't change. "He was forgotten," he said simply, "like so many others. He offered himself like all do in the end." I raised the lantern. "He didn't offer anything. You took him." Isaiah's smile vanished, and for the first time I saw what lay beneath it. The dust shifted behind him, coalesced into figures, tall, thin, shrouded in cloaks of wind and ash. Their faces were stretched, skinless, mouths wide open in eternal scream. The forgotten. They lined the chamber silently, watching, waiting. Isaiah raised one finger and pointed it at me. "You already belong here, Daniel. The land remembers you. The blood remembers. Finish what your brother began. Finish what your grandfather couldn't." The wind howled again. The figures began to move, circling. The names on the walls pulsed, glowing with dull red heat. And then, above the roar of it all, I heard a voice. Clear. Familiar. "Ellis, don't listen to him." The chamber split open with the sound of thunder. The stone altar cracked down the middle. Light poured in from above, white, pure, blinding. The trapdoor had returned, wide open, and standing at the top was Ellis, holding a rope. "Move," he yelled. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted across the chamber, ducking under a reaching tendril of dust. Isaiah shrieked, a sound like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The figures lunged. I jumped. Fingers closed around mine, and Alice pulled me up. We collapsed outside the chapel. The rope burned my palms. My lungs screamed, but the wind was gone. Just silence now. Alice sat beside me, eyes hollow. "You saw him, didn't you?" he whispered. I nodded. He stared down at the chapel ruins. He tried the same thing with me. Same voice, same promises. That's how he keeps the names alive, by convincing the living to carry them forward. I looked up at him. How do we stop him? Ellis didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "We bury the name, for good this time." Part 6. What the Wind Forgets. We spent the night in silence. Ellis and I sat by the remains of the chapel, backs pressed to the cold stone, as the stars above twisted into unfamiliar constellations. Neither of us dared to sleep. Every so often, the wind would return, briefly like a whisper brushing past the ear, and vanish again. And with each gust, I could swear I heard less of the world. No crickets, no shifting trees, no night birds, just names slowly fading. In the morning, we made a plan. "We burn it," Ellis said. "The chapel? No, the book." He rubbed his hands together, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from some slow-burning anger that had outlasted its expiration. "It's all in that damn ledger," he said. "The bindings, the rituals, the memory, everything tied to it. That's how Dent holds on." "But I saw my name," I whispered. "Caleb's too. What if burning it doesn't just erase the dead?" Ellis looked at me steady. "Maybe it should." We returned to my farm first. The door had been pushed open. Inside, the furniture was untouched, but the walls had changed. Names had been carved into the paint. Some I knew, some I didn't. Across the kitchen wall, in deep gouged lines, was written, "You cannot bury the wind." We didn't speak, just gathered what we needed: kerosene, rope, nails, and my grandfather's Bible. The pages had started to fall out, but the spiral symbol in red pencil was still there. We took it as a sign. The ground around the chapel was soft, not mud, thus fine and gray, like ash, as if the entire hillside had already burned once before. Ellis led the way. "I think the entrance shifts," he said. "Moves to protect itself." "How do you know where it is now?" "I don't," he said, "but I remember what Dent hates." He dropped the Bible onto the ground and stomped it open to the spiral. The wind screamed. A hole split open beneath our feet. The descent was different this time. No stairs, just a long drop into shadow, the walls pulsing like lungs. The lantern flickered, though we hadn't lit it. Everything glowed red, as if lit from inside the stone. When we landed, the altar room had changed. The names on the walls were now etched deeper, and new ones had appeared. Ellis Ward, Daniel Marin, Isaiah Dent, and beneath Dent's name, a single line in blood. The first name given, the last to be forgotten. The book was waiting for us, still on the altar, its leather cover now breathing, rising and falling like chest skin. Ellis stepped forward, uncapped the kerosene, and poured it slow. The book moaned. Not a creak, not wind, a deep human moan, as if it knew. I stepped beside him and struck the match. The fire took quickly. The book curled inward on itself, like it was trying to close its own body. A scream echoed through the chamber, not from above, but from beneath the floor. Ellis dropped the match. The book ignited. The room shook. Stone cracked. The names on the walls bled dust and smoke. From the far wall, Isaiah Dent burst through the stone. No longer calm, no longer human. His skin was peeled back, eyes replaced with voids that spat lightning. His limbs stretched too far, spine arching with each step like a puppet on jagged strings. "You fools," he howled. The fire spread to the altar. The names on the book charred, page by page, screaming louder with each name lost. Ellis raised his arms. "You're not remembered anymore," Dent shrieked. The ash spun into cyclones, lifting the forgotten ones from the stone. Their mouths opened, screaming without sound, pulled upward into the firelight. One by one, the names burned. Caleb's, mine, Ellis's, then Dent's. And when his did, the chamber split down the center. A column of wind roared through the earth, sucking in every memory, every whisper, every shadow of Dent's name. And then, silence. We woke outside, lying in the wheat. The chapel was gone. No ruin, no stone, not even ash, just golden grass where the hill used to be. The wind was still. No names, just air. Real, breathing, empty air. Ellis sat up beside me, blinking against the sun. "It's over," he said softly. I nodded, but in the pit of my stomach I knew better, because when I turned toward my house, it was gone. Only the well remained, and carved into its stone lip was a single word: remember. Part 7, Hollow Ground. 3 days passed. I didn't sleep much. Neither did Ellis. We took turns keeping watch, though there was nothing to watch for. The air was clean. The birds returned. Even the wheat began to shift with the breeze again, no longer flattened under invisible hands. But the well still stood, alone, center of the field. Its stones darker now, like they'd soaked something in. The word remember carved into the rim never faded. We tried scraping it, covering it, chipping away with steel and salt. Nothing touched it. Sometimes when I walked past in the evening, I thought I saw the word moving, just slightly, like it breathed. Ellis refused to go near it. He spent most of his days on the porch, hands trembling around a coffee cup, staring at nothing. "I think we ended the name," he said once, "but not the memory." On the fourth night, the wind returned, soft at first, just a breeze whispering through the eaves. But then it began to call again. Not names this time. Questions. What did you bury? Who remembers you? Would you trade your name for peace? I stayed up till dawn, watching the well from the attic window. Nothing moved, but I felt it, like an itch behind the eyes, a pressure in the sinuses, like I was being remembered from the inside out. The next morning, Ellis was gone. I found his footprints leading out past the wheat. They trailed straight to the well. No blood, no scuff marks, no signs of struggle. Only the faint impression of where he'd knelt. And beside it, a message scratched into the dirt. "IT wants to forget." That night I heard Ellis whispering, not in the wind, inside the house, in the walls. His voice was cracked, far away, like it was coming from the other end of a long pipe buried in the earth. "I wasn't enough," he said. "I wasn't forgotten. I thought about packing up, leaving the land for good, but something in me resisted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the weight of generations. This place had been my family's for nearly a century. My grandfather died on this land. My father broke himself trying to keep it alive. And I'd buried Caleb here. If I left now, all of them would just fade, become more names lost to the wind. Maybe that's what Dent wanted all along. Not worship, just permanence." I went back to the well. Midday, clear skies, birds chirping. I stood at its edge and looked down. Still no bottom, still no echo, still no rope, just that overwhelming sense of being known. And then I heard a voice, familiar, female. "Aren't you tired, Danny?" My mother, dead for 15 years. Her voice, soft as cotton, drifted up from the well. "You always carried too much, always tried to be strong." The wind around the well shifted, pressing in like arms. "You could let it go," she said. "Let us remember for you." I closed my eyes. Her voice was wrong. Too even, too perfect, like a recording loop just a second too long. "You're not her," I said. Silence. Then, Laughter. Oh, dry. You want to be remembered? That's the curse. I stepped back. The earth trembled. Cracks formed along the stone lip. Dust poured from the seams. The carved word remember shimmered, then flickered like a candle. The voice rose again. Not hers this time. Just dead. Not screaming anymore. Come. Certain. You burned the book, he said. But the well is the memory. You wrote your name with blood. The land will not forget. I dropped the lantern in. There was no sound of it hitting bottom. Just a long, slow exhale from the earth. Then silence. But in my chest something shifted, like a thread snapping loose from a wound. That night I dreamed of Caleb again. But he wasn't angry this time. He stood by the river, bare feet in the current, eyes clear. You broke it, he said. I shook my head. No, I whispered. I think I just made room for something worse. He smiled. Then dig deeper. Part 8. The name that remains. I didn't leave the house for 2 days. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Just sat by the window watching the well from the upstairs loft. It never moved. Didn't crack open. Didn't speak. But the wind never stopped. Soft, gentle, repeating the same thing over and over again. Dig deeper. I thought it meant metaphor, memory, guilt. But on the third morning, when I stepped outside and saw the footprints again, leading from the barn to the well and then just stopping, I understood. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I brought tools. Rope, lantern, spade, a thermos of coffee that went cold before I even reached the stone rim. The sky overhead was low and gray, though no storm brewed. The well stared back at me. I dropped a stone inside. No sound. Same as always. But this time I didn't stop. I built a rig from the old pulley in the barn and lowered myself in. 1 foot, 10 feet, 20. The air turned colder. Not the natural chill of depth. It was the cold of absence, of a place forgotten by time. Around the 30-foot mark, the walls changed. No longer stone, but old wetwood, lined with carvings. Hundreds of them. Names. Scratched in every direction. Layer over layer. Some so faint I couldn't read them. Others gouged with such violence the wood had splintered and bled black rot. At the bottom, the shaft widened into a chamber. Circular. Dirt floor. No exits. But in the center, a tree. Its roots tangled like veins. Bark black as coal. No leaves. No branches. Just a single twisting trunk that reached halfway up the shaft, ending in jagged splinters. Carved into the bark, at eye level, was a name. Not Dent. Not mine. Caleb. I staggered back. Then I heard him. Why did you leave me here? His voice came from behind the tree, but when I looked, there was nothing. Just more roots. More names. You said I was just like Dad, he continued. Said I was weak. I fell to my knees. The soil pulsed beneath me. Alive. Breathing. He spoke again, closer now. I stayed behind for this. For you. I was never meant to be remembered. The tree shifted. Its roots lifted slightly, revealing bones beneath. A jaw. A rib cage. A wedding ring. All buried among 1,000 others. All forgotten. I thought you left, I whispered. I didn't, the voice said. You buried me. The bark cracked. A long, crooked mouth tore open in the tree trunk, just beneath Caleb's name. And it spoke, not his voice. Dense. You broke the book, he hissed. But the well was the root, and the tree, the seed. Every name written still echoes here. Yours, Caleb's. All who remember and all who are remembered. I stood gripping the spade. You're not memory, I said. You're hunger. The tree twisted toward me. Dent laughed. Memory is hunger. Every story told. Every name carved. You wanted permanence. You wanted to matter. I stepped forward, eyes locked on the bark. You can keep the name, I said. I'm done remembering. I swung the spade, not at the trunk, at the root beneath my feet. The first cut bled black. The second sent the chamber shaking. The third made the wind above go still. Voices screamed from the walls. Names poured into the air like ash. The ground collapsed, the tree curling inward, howling through its wooden throat. I jumped back onto the rope and climbed, faster than I ever thought I could. Below me, the well choked on dust and wind and splinters of ancient bark. And then, stillness. When I pulled myself out, the sky was blue, truly blue. No haze, no dust, no names on the wind. I crawled onto the grass and rolled onto my back, laughing until I cried. It's been 3 weeks. I buried what was left of the tree beneath a cairn of stone. I moved the house, planted new seed, wrote nothing, marked no graves. There are no names here anymore, just wind and peace. But sometimes, when I walk too close to the well, I still hear a voice, very faint, not dense, not Caleb's, mine, whispering something I can't quite make out. A name I no longer remember.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.